We're joined by Alec Christie, who's a partner in the intellectual property and technology and specialises in privacy at DLA Piper. Alec, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Kate.
Now, Alec, the Australian privacy principles have been in place for 6 months now. What are the key things that businesses have learnt?
Yeah, 6 months today, and it's not so much what they've learned, it's, I suppose, what they've had dropped upon them or what they have been exposed to. We're looking at 5 of the main ones that we've seen. In reverse order, number 5 would be the activism of the regulator. It is a he at this time, has been a lot more active than people expected. Own motion investigations have increased, reports have become more severe, and a lot more people have had their hands slapped in preparation for the fines that are now in place. So the next report that comes out should be looking at issues under the new APPs, and now we're in the territory where a $1.7 million fine could be applied. Number 4, the next one we've seen is a confusion around overseas disclosure. They've changed the words in the APPs from transfer to disclosure. People aren't quite sure what that means, when they've disclosed to a recipient overseas and when they've not disclosed. I mean, briefly, if someone who's not an employee of your organisation looks at the information overseas, even though it remains on a server in Australia, that's an overseas disclosure. And there are certain requirements in the Act, and the companies remain liable. So that's caused a little bit of confusion, but at the end of the day, people can work through that and put it in contractual terms. Number 3 is collecting via third parties, and that's always been there, but no one's ever paid any attention to it. And that's if you collect information and pass it on to me, then we've always said that as long as you had done what you had to do under the Privacy Act with the individual and gave a privacy policy, then it was fine. And you told people you were going to disclose it to me, it was fine. Unfortunately, now it's crystal clear that then when I receive the information of the third-party individual, I have my own obligations to notify them of my privacy policy. Now, you can imagine that's caused some concerns because people don't know how to do it, and really do they have to, if they've bought a list, do they have to contact the 1,000 names on a list? So there are some issues around that. And then the last 2, I suppose, the most serious, security. People have not understood what sort of security they have to have in terms of compliance with the privacy law. It says reasonable steps, and of course we think that's not very much, but there's a 32-page guidance from the Privacy Commissioner, and things that in my experience clients are aware and usually do about 50% of those things, but about 40% are things that are well above and beyond what many of our clients are doing, and I would say most businesses are doing. So it's worthwhile digging out that guidance on security and having a look. And the final one, I suppose, I've ranked it number 1 because it's the most costly and annoying to implement, and that's the destruction of data once you've used it for the purposes for which you've collected it. Now, we'd all love to keep information forever. We're not allowed to under the APPs. The law says you cannot. So when you've used it for the purposes you've notified, and you don't need it for like tax records or corporate records pursuant to a statute, you have an obligation to delete or de-identify. Now, you can imagine reverse engineering an IT system to do that is very expensive. So there have been major issues around that.
Well, a number of issues that you mentioned there. What about for the next 12 months? Are there any areas where you think we could see an increase in privacy-related issues?
Yes, Kate. There are 2 areas where we're seeing some action at the moment, and we expect it to pick up, and that is the big data space, big data analytics, and surprisingly facial recognition. Facial recognition first. I think a lot of people watching this will go, oh, you're kidding. But we're seeing the likes of Facebook thinking seriously about reintroducing their facial recognition on Facebook. The cost of the software has plummeted. It is now readily accessible and available and cheap. And if you think about how many CCTV cameras there are just around Sydney alone, and you put 2 and 2 together, I mean, there's a lot of raw material. And if you're a company that wants to add that little bit of extra service by knowing who it is that's walked through the door and what they like to buy or what they like to look at, then facial recognition is something I think a lot of people will think about. And the issues there, I don't even want to start. The privacy issues are enormous, so it's a case of working that through. Big data's been around for a little bit longer, but we're now seeing a lot of clients actually implement projects around big data analytics. And the problems there are that the Privacy Act doesn't specifically cover it. The APPs don't specifically cover big data, so you've got to go back to first principles. And that means even if your data sets are anonymous, by using the big data analytics, most of the time they become re-identified. They can work out who we are. And once you do that, even though you've got anonymous data coming in, your obligations under the Privacy Act to notify all those people that you've got their information arise. So, in both cases, I think the caution I'd say is from the beginning, think about privacy, build it into the project, because if you have to do it at the end, or God forbid, if the Privacy Commissioner comes knocking, it's going to cost you a lot more.
Yeah, so many issues for businesses to consider there, Alec. Is there any place they can go to get more information?
Yeah, if they go to the DLA Piper website, DLA Piper Australia website, we've put out the top 5 issues that have been faced and a little bit more detail than I spoke about here today. They can find information there about those, and of course, happy for them to follow up with me if they have further questions.
Alec, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.